The neon glow of Las Vegas bled through the penthouse windows of the International Hotel, painting streaks of pink and electric blue across the opulent carpet. Elvis Presley stood by the glass, a mug of lukewarm coffee cooling in his hand, his gaze fixed on the dazzling chaos below. It was late even for Vegas, long after his second sold-out show, and the usual adrenaline high had long since faded, replaced by a familiar heavy ache. He was Elvis the King. A legend. Millions loved him, screamed his name, bought his records, flocked to his concerts. He had the money, the fame, the endless supply of beautiful guitars and flashy jumpsuits. He had his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, a loyal band of brothers who handled everything from his schedule to his late-night cravings. He was never truly alone, not in the physical sense, but lately the solitude felt deeper than ever. Every day was a whirlwind. Interviews, rehearsals, sound checks, meet and greets. The roar of the crowd, the blinding flash of cameras. Performed with every fiber of his being, poured his heart out into every note, every hip shake, and the audience gave it back, a tidal wave of adoration that was intoxicating, addictive. But once the final curtain dropped, once the last fan screamed his name, he was back in this gilded cage, surrounded by people who loved him. Yes, but also people who relied on him, who managed his life, who were part of the machine. He felt it pressing down on him, the expectations, the demands, the constant need to be on. He was tired. Not just physically, though his body ached from the nightly performances, but in his soul. He yearned for something simple, something real, something that wasn't about being Elvis Presley, the global superstar. He wanted to laugh until his sides hurt, to feel genuinely light, unburdened. Turned from the window, glancing around the spacious living area of the suite. Empty coffee cups and crumpled newspapers littered the tables. One of the guys, maybe Joe Esposito, was snoring softly on a sofa, a magazine draped over his face. Charlie Hodge was tuning a guitar in a corner, his brow furrowed in concentration. Red and Sonny West were probably in the kitchen raiding the fridge. Life went on humming around him, always centered on him, the axis around which their world revolved. He walked over to the grand piano, idly running his fingers over the keys. A sad melody emerged, soft and haunting. It was a song he'd heard once somewhere, about a lonesome dove. He stopped, shaking his head. He didn't want to be lonesome. He didn't want to be a dove trap. He wanted to fly, to be free, to be a regular guy for just one moment. He thought back to his childhood, to simpler times in Tupelo and Memphis. Days spent running in the sun, getting dirty, chasing after friends, getting into harmless mischief. A fleeting image flashed in his mind, a hot summer day, a garden hose, and the gleeful shriek of his cousin as he got soaked. A small, after, carefree fun. It felt like a lifetime ago. He sighed, pushing away from the piano. The heavy velvet curtains seemed to press in on him. The expensive furniture felt less like comfort and more like an elaborate stage prop. He needed to shake things up. He needed a jolt, an unexpected moment that would cut through the routine, the performance, the weight of his own celebrity. He walked into his vast bedroom, the silent king surveying his kingdom. The silence was deafening tonight. Pulled on a silk robe, the cool fabric a contrast to the warmth of his internal turmoil. His mind drifted, searching for an outlet, a way to escape, even if just for a few hours. He thought about going for a drive, but the thought of being recognized of the crowds deterred him. He thought about calling a friend, but what would he even say? "Hey, I'm Elvis, and I'm tired of being me tonight." He slumped onto the edge of his bed, looking at his reflection in the mirrored ceiling. A famous face looking back at him, weary but still striking. Closed his eyes, wishing he could just disappear for a while. Then, like a sudden burst of sunlight through storm clouds, an idea absurd and brilliant began to form in his mind. It was so unexpected, so completely out of character for the king, that it made him chuckle, a genuine, unforced sound that felt foreign in the silent room. It was crazy, it was childish, it was perfect. He opened his eyes, a mischievous glint replacing the weariness. He knew exactly what he needed. This wasn't about fame or money or accolades. This was about fun. Pure, unadulterated fun, and he was going to share it with everyone. He stretched a new energy buzzing beneath his skin. The weight of the crown hadn't disappeared, but for the first time in days, he felt a spark of rebellion. A tiny, mischievous grin spread across his face. Vegas was about to get a whole lot wetter. The next morning, the suite was bustling as usual, but Elvis was humming a tune he hadn't thought about in years. A silly, upbeat little number from an old cartoon. He ate his breakfast with unusual enthusiasm, his eyes sparkling with a secret amusement. The guys, his ever-present circle, noticed the shift immediately. "You're in a good mood, Joe Esposito observed, sipping his coffee. "Show went well last night, huh?" Elvis just smiled, a wider, more genuine smile than they'd seen in a while. Joe's show was great, but I'm thinking about something else." He paused, taking a bite of his bacon. Something different. He spent the morning making calls not about music or movies, but about logistics. He needed specific items, and he needed them quietly. He sent Charlie Hodge out on a seemingly innocuous errand, then Red and Sunny West on another, each assignment a small piece of his growing puzzle. They looked at him, strangely used to his eccentric requests, but this time there was an extra layer of mystery. His mind was buzzing with the plan. He'd seen a small toy store near the hotel tucked away behind a souvenir shop. He remembered passing it the day before, barely noticing it, but now it was like a beacon. That's where the magic would begin. Around noon, he decided to take a stroll, something he rarely did without an escort and a plan. He told Joe he needed some air, a moment of peace. Joe, ever protective, suggested a drive, but Elvis shook his head. "Nah, Joe, just a walk. I need to clear my head, and don't worry, I'll be quick, no fuss." Joe, sensing Elvis's unusual lightness, agreed, though he still had a couple of the guys keep a discreet watch from a distance. Elvis slipped out of the hotel, wearing a simple pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap, trying to blend in. It was a futile effort, of course. His presence was magnetic, but today he wasn't trying to be the king. He was just a guy with a mission. He found the toy store easily enough. It was smaller than he expected, packed with shelves of dolls, board games, and various plastic novelties. He wandered the aisles, a sense of childlike wonder beginning to bubble up inside him. For a moment he wasn't a world-famous entertainer, he was just a kid looking for fun. Then he saw them, a whole wall dedicated to water pistols. They came in all shapes and sizes: neon green, bright orange, sleek black. Some were small and discreet, others were massive, designed for serious aquatic warfare. His grin widened. This was it. This was the key. Picked up a large, brightly colored one, hefting it in his hand. It felt light yet powerful. He imagined the spray, the surprise on someone's face. He could practically hear the laughter already. He looked around. No one seemed to be paying him much attention, which was a rare luxury. He approached the counter where a bored-looking teenager was chewing gum. "Excuse me," Elvis said, trying to keep his voice low and unremarkable. "I need a lot of these." He gestured to the water pistol wall. The teenager barely looked up. "How many?" Elvis thought for a moment. "Enough for a whole bunch of people, maybe 20. No, 30. Yeah, 30 of the good ones, and maybe 10 of those super soakers." He pointed to the biggest models. The teenager finally looked up, his eyes widening as he took in Elvis's full height. His slightly too familiar profile recognition flickered. "Whoa, you're... Let's just say I'm preparing for a very important, highly classified mission," he smiled, radiating his famous charm. "And I need the best equipment money can buy. And a few extra towels, maybe." The teenager, now fully starstruck, fumbled with the register. "Why, yes, sir, right away." He started pulling down water pistols from the shelves, his movements jerky with excitement. Elvis picked out a few extra large ones, making sure he had the biggest and best for himself. He also grabbed a couple of small discreet ones that could be hidden easily. The bill was surprisingly large for toy guns, but Elvis didn't bat an eye. Money was just a tool. Happiness, genuine laughter, those were priceless. He paid in cash, instructing the teenager to box them up in plain, unmarked boxes. Carrying the boxes back to the hotel was a challenge. He had to be discreet. He called Joe, telling him he had some purchases that needed to be brought up to the suite without drawing attention. Joe, still puzzled but trusting, sent down a couple of the guys, Marty Lacker and Jerry Schilling, who met Lacker and jealous side entered SS. Secret weapons, Jerry, for a very special operation. Now let's get these up to the suite and keep them out of sight. It's a surprise. Marty and Jerry exchanged glances, shrugging. They were used to Elvis's whims, but this felt different. There was a lightness about him, a youthful glee that had been missing for far too long. They hauled the boxes up to the penthouse, storing them in a rarely used utility closet as instructed. Back in the suite, Elvis closed the closet door with a soft click, a triumphant smile. On his face, the arsenal was ready. The plan was set. All that was left. He was preparing for war, but it was going to be the most fun war he'd ever fought. The next few hours were a dance of subtle misdirection and barely contained glee. For Elvis, he felt like a spy moving through his own penthouse suite, planning his ambush. He knew he couldn't do it alone, not if he wanted to make a real splash. He needed co-conspirators. He decided to enlist Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling first. Joe was his most trusted confidant, the foreman of the Memphis Mafia. Jerry was quick-witted and always up for an adventure. They would understand even if they initially thought he'd lost his mind. He pulled Joe aside, drawing him into the privacy of his bedroom. Joe, ever vigilant, immediately looked concerned. "Everything all right? You seem bouncy." Elvis chuckled. "More than all right, Joe. I'm feeling inspired, and I need your help with something big. Something that will make us all feel like kids again." He paused, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Joe nodded, still confused. "Yeah? What's in 'em? My money's on some new kind of stereo equipment, or maybe more jumpsuits." Elvis grinned. "Better, much better." He led Joe to the utility closet and dramatically opened the door. Inside, stacked neatly, were the boxes of water pistols, dozens of them, small, medium, large, and the monster super soakers. Joe stared, his jaw slowly dropping. He picked up one of the smaller ones, turning it over in his hand. "Water pistols, eh? What in the world?" "Operation Soak the Mafia," Elvis declared, his eyes gleaming. "We're going to have a water pistol fight. The biggest, baddest one Las Vegas has ever seen." Joe blinked. Then slowly, a smile started to spread across his face, turning into a full-blown grin. "A water pistol fight? You're serious?" "Never been more serious, Joe," Elvis said. "We're going to catch him completely off guard. Imagine Red West's face when he gets soaked. Or Marty Lacker's." Joe let out a hearty laugh. "Oh, that's rich. Red hates getting wet when he's not in a pool. This is brilliant. The tension in Joe's shoulders seemed to visibly relax. It had been a long time since he'd seen Elvis this genuinely excited about something so simple. "All right," Elvis said, clapping his hands together. "Here's the plan. We need to fill these bad boys up without anyone noticing. I'm thinking we use the bathroom, spread it out. We'll need buckets too, for refills. And then we pick our targets. I'm thinking a surprise attack, when they least expect it." Jerry's reaction was similar to Joe's initial bewilderment, followed by outright mirth. "This is insane, Jerry laughed. "But I'm in 100%, and who's our first target?" "Everyone," Elvis said with a devilish twinkle. "Absolutely everyone, except for us, of course. Not at first, anyway." The three of them spent the next hour working in shifts, quietly filling the water pistols in the various bathrooms of the massive suite. It was a comically clandestine operation. Joe would stand guard while Jerry filled a dozen guns. Then Jerry would take over as Joe refilled. Elvis, meanwhile, paced, strategizing, humming quietly. He felt a surge of energy he hadn't experienced in months. This was pure, unadulterated fun. Something completely outside the demands of his career. They carefully placed the loaded weapons in strategic locations. Under sofa cushions, behind curtains, in laundry baskets. They even hid a few under towels in the bathrooms themselves, ready for a quick draw. The biggest super soakers were reserved for Elvis. Joe and Jerry kept close by in their designated command center. A walk-in closet they temporarily cleared out. "All right, gentlemen," Elvis whispered, looking at his two co-conspirators. "The arsenal is loaded, the traps are set. Now for the timing." They decided to wait until after dinner, when most of the entourage would be relaxed, watching TV or playing cards. It would be the perfect moment of unsuspecting calm before the storm. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Elvis could feel his heart thrumming with excitement, not nerves from a performance, but pure joyous anticipation. He caught a glimpse of himself in a hallway mirror. He looked different. His eyes were brighter, his posture straighter, and the lines of worry that had etched themselves around his mouth seemed to have softened. He actually looked young again. He saw Red West heading towards the kitchen, probably for a late-night snack. Red was big, imposing, always ready for a fight. Elvis imagined the look on Red's face when a torrent of cold water hit him. The thought made him stifle a giggle. "Remember," Elvis whispered to Joe and Jerry, "no warnings, just launch, and if anyone tries to surrender, well, they just get more soaped." Joe and Jerry exchanged mischievous grins. As the evening wore on, Elvis tried to act normal, but his restless energy was evident. He kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the perfect moment. The other guys were oblivious, joking, chatting, unwinding after a long day of managing Elvis's affairs. They had no idea the king was about to declare war, a war of laughter and water. The stage was set. The players were in position. The tension for Elvis and his two generals was electric. He knew this wasn't just a silly prank. This was a moment of release, a chance to break free from the constraints of his gilded cage and reconnect with the simple joy of being alive, surrounded by people he loved. The first shot would echo through the suite, signaling the start of a legendary, heartwarming battle. The clock on the wall read 9:30 p.m. The living room of the penthouse suite was a tableau of casual relaxation. Marty Lacker was deep in a poker game with a few other guys, their faces intent on their cards. Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor, was quietly reading a book in a corner. Red and Sonny West were sprawled on separate sofas, watching a boxing match on the giant television, occasionally grunting their approval or disapproval. Charlie Hodge was strumming an acoustic guitar, playing a soft melody that drifted through the air. Elvis, Joe, and Jerry exchanged quick, silent glances. It was time. Elvis, who had been casually leaning against a doorway, suddenly straightened. In his right hand, hidden behind his leg, was a gleaming, fully loaded super soaker. He took a deep breath, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. This was it, his first target, Red West. Red was focused on the boxing match, completely unaware. Elvis raised the water pistol slowly, aiming carefully. The silence in the room, broken only by the TV and Charlie's guitar, made the moment feel strangely epic. Splah! A powerful stream of cold water erupted from Elvis's super soaker, hitting Red squarely in the side of the head and shoulder. Red yelped, startled, his eyes wide as he flinched away, water dripping from his hair and shirt. "What the?" Red roared, scrambling upright, shaking his head like a wet dog. Before Red could fully process what had happened, Joe Esposito emerged from behind a large potted plant, a super soaker, almost as big as Elvis's, in his hands. He let loose a torrent of water directly at Sonny West, who was still blinking in confusion. Sonny sputtered, jumping up. "Drenched. Surprise!" Elvis yelled, his voice ringing with pure, unadulterated joy. He unleashed another stream at Red, who was now fully aware and thoroughly annoyed. Chaos erupted. Marty Lacker at the poker table looked up, startled by the commotion. Just then, Jerry Schilling, emerging from behind the bar, blasted Marty with a smaller but equally effective stream of water. Cards scattered, chips clattered, and Marty shrieked, jumping back. "Hey, my good shirt," he protested, but his face was already breaking into a bewildered grin. Larry Geller, looking up from his book, barely had time to register the chaos before Charlie Hodge, who had silently swapped his guitar for a medium-sized water gun, aimed and fired. Larry let out a surprised gasp as cold water soaked his shirt and the pages of his book. "Charlie, not the Holy Scripture," he cried. But even he couldn't help but chuckle. The initial shock quickly gave way to a mix of outrage and pure, uninhibited laughter. Guys, drenched and disoriented, slowly realized what was happening. Elvis the King was leading a full-blown water pistol assault. Red West, his face now a mask of mock fury, pointed a dripping finger at Elvis. You gonna pay for that, E?" "Oh yeah?" Elvis taunted, blasting Red again. "Come and get me, big boy." He dodged behind a sofa, laughing uncontrollably as Red, now fully engaged, lunged after him. The suite, usually a place of quiet reverence for the king, was now transformed into a watery battlefield. Shrieks of surprise, shouts of mock anger, and peals of genuine laughter filled the air. Water glistened on the polished floors, on the velvet furniture, on the faces of the Memphis Mafia. Some of the guys instinctively ran for cover. Others, spotting the dozens of unused water pistols that Elvis, Joe, and Jerry had strategically placed around the room, scrambled to arm themselves. It didn't take long. Soon the initial assault turned into a full-scale counterattack. Charlie Hodge, now thoroughly enjoying himself, aimed his water pistol at Jerry. "You think you can just soak, Charlie Hodge, and get away with it? Think again, sunshine," he fired, and Jerry dodged, laughing. Marty soaked, but now armed with a large green water gun he'd grabbed from under a throw pillow, went straight for Joe Esposito. "Joe, you sneaky dog, I knew you were in on this." He unleashed a furious spray and Joe, laughing, returned fire. The living room became a maze of dodging bodies, flashing water streams, and the constant sound of pumps reloading. Elvis was everywhere leading the charge, a huge, unburdened smile plastered across his face. He ducked, weaved, and fired with expert precision. He felt light, alive, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. This wasn't the Elvis who had to perform, who had to be perfect. This was just Elvis, a guy having a blast with his friends. He saw one of the younger guys, a new addition to the crew, trying to hide behind a curtain, nervously peeking out. Elvis aimed his super soaker and gave him a full blast. The young man gasped, then dissolved into giggles, finally grabbing a water pistol himself and joining the fray. The sheer absurdity of the situation made it even more exhilarating. Here they were the most famous entertainer in the world, and his loyal crew, normally impeccably dressed and serious, now running around a luxurious Vegas suite, soaking each other like a bunch of kids in a backyard. It was glorious. The water was cold, but the laughter was warm, filling the room with an energy that was far more powerful than any stage lights. The first shot had been fired and the battle for joy had truly begun. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by an infectious, competitive spirit. The penthouse suite, designed for quiet luxury, had transformed into a dynamic battleground. The polished marble floors became slick, the plush rugs soaked in patches, and the air hummed with shouts, laughter, and the distinct squirt, squirt, squirt of dozens of water pistols. Elvis was in his element. He moved with an agility that surprised even himself, ducking behind enormous sofas, peeking around gilded columns, and launching surprise attacks. His famous hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was now plastered to his forehead, dripping. His silk robe was clinging to him, but he didn't care. He was laughing, truly laughing, a sound that filled the suite and echoed off the high ceilings. Red and Sonny West, initially caught off guard, had quickly become formidable opponents. Red, despite his size, was surprisingly nimble, using his bulk to shield himself and block others. Sonny, with his quick reflexes, managed to dodge most incoming fire, returning shots with impressive accuracy. They formed a temporary alliance, a wall of water-wielding might, trying to corner Elvis. "All right, King?" Red bellowed, a stream of water narrowly missing Elvis's ear. "Time for a royal soaking," Elvis grinned, sidestepping a blast from Sonny. "You'll have to catch me first, big fella," he retaliated, with a double-barreled blast from his super soaker, catching both Red and Sonny square in the chest. They gasped, momentarily stunned by the sheer volume of water. Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling, Elvis's initial co-conspirators, were like strategic commanders moving around the perimeter, taking out targets of opportunity. Joe, with his calm demeanor, aimed for precision shots, while Jerry, more exuberant, went for volume, soaking anyone who dared to cross his path. Marty Lacker, having lost his poker game to the chaos, was now fully committed to revenge. He chased Charlie Hodge, who was giggling uncontrollably, occasionally turning to fire a quick shot over his shoulder. "You won't escape me, Charlie," Marty yelled, slipping a little on the wet floor. "That was a good shirt. It was asking for it," Charlie retorted, dodging behind a massive bookshelf. People slid across the floor, bumped into furniture. Mercifully, nothing breakable was truly in harm's way, and dived for cover. The rich fabrics of the draperies and upholstery began to show damp patches, but no one cared. The luxury around them faded into the background. What mattered was the exhilarating childish joy of the moment. Elvis found himself face to face with Larry Geller, who had somehow managed to arm himself with 2 small water pistols, one in each hand. Larry, usually serene and thoughtful, had a wild, playful look in his eyes. "Peace and love, Elvis," Larry said, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. Before firing both pistols simultaneously, Elvis roared with laughter, taking the hits head on. "Not tonight, Larry, tonight it's war." He returned fire, drenching Larry completely. Larry threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure delight. Refills became a strategic challenge. Bathrooms, strategically spread throughout the suite, became reload zone. Guys would sprint water pistols empty to a sink, frantically filling up, then dart back into the fray, revitalized and ready to fire. There were momentary truces in the bathrooms, quick, breathless exchanges of banter before they burst back out, ready to drench their opponents. Elvis paused for a moment behind a large armchair, catching his breath. His sides ached from laughing. His heart was pounding with exhilarating energy. He looked out at the scene. His friends, his loyal companions, all of them, soaked, disheveled, and utterly, wonderfully happy. He saw the genuine smiles, the unforced laughter, the way their eyes sparkled. This was real. This was the connection he had been craving. For once they weren't his employees, his bodyguards, his assistants. They were just men, playing like kids, sharing a moment of pure, unadulterated fun. He knew the price of fame. Constant demands, the loss of privacy, the feeling of being trapped in a public persona, but moments like this, silly and spontaneous, made it all worthwhile. These were the moments that reminded him he was still just a man capable of joy and connection, even amidst the chaos of his extraordinary life. He emerged from his hiding spot, spotting Joe Esposito cornering Sonny. West Elvis aimed his super soaker and let out a triumphant yell. "Double trouble," he cried, trenching both of them in one glorious sweep. The battle continued to rage, escalating in joyful intensity. The elegant suite was a mess, but it was a beautiful mess, a testament to freedom and friendship. Every splash of water, every burst of laughter was a release, a reaffirmation of the simple, heartwarming power of play. And Elvis, the king of rock and roll, was also, for tonight, the undisputed king of the water war. The battle had raged for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a little over an hour. The energy, however, was still electric. Everyone was soaked through, their clothes clinging to their bodies, hair plastered to their heads. Water dripped from the ceiling in a few places where ambitious shots had reached the suite was a glorious watery chaos. Slowly, the frantic pace began to ease. Water pistols, now mostly empty, were lowered. Panting bodies slumped onto water-dampened sofas or leaned against walls, their chests heaving with laughter and exertion. The sounds of frantic squirting faded, replaced by gasps for breath, and the lingering echoes of exuberant shouts. Elvis, equally drenched, sat heavily on the edge of a large ottoman, his super soaker lying innocently beside him. He looked around the room, a wide, beatific smile on his face. His eyes, usually carrying a hint of weariness, now shone with genuine light. "Well," he managed, still catching his breath. That was invigorating. Chorus of agreement mixed with groans and chuckles went around the room. Red West, dripping wet but grinning, leaned against a doorway. "Invigorating? I think you just declared war on my dry cleaning bill." There was no real complaint in his voice, only amusement. Sonny West peeled his wet shirt off, wringing it out over a discarded newspaper. "I haven't had that much fun since I was 10 and we tried to flood the neighbor's yard." Joe Esposito, wiping water from his face, walked over to Elvis and clapped him on the shoulder. "You sneaky devil, I should have known you were up to something when you were humming this morning." "It was a spur-of-the-moment thing," Elvis confessed, though his eyes still held a mischievous twinkle. "Just felt like we all needed a good soaking, needed to let loose." Larry Geller, his spiritual book now a soggy mess, simply smiled. "Sometimes, Elvis, the greatest truths are found in the most unexpected and simple moments, like water." Everyone shared a moment of comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after shared exertion and pure joy. They looked around at the mess, the dampness, the disarray, and instead of dismay there was a sense of lightness, a feeling of camaraderie that had been deepened by the shared absurdity. Charlie Hodge, still chuckling, walked over and picked up one of the smaller empty water pistols. "You know, Ear," he said, looking at it admiringly, "for a king, you sure know how to humble your subjects." Elvis laughed. "That's the point, Charlie. No kings or subjects tonight. Just us." He meant it. In that moment, the hierarchy dissolved. Pressures of fame, the demands of the schedule, the weight of responsibility, it all seemed to melt away with the dripping water. They were just a group of men, friends, who had just shared a wonderfully silly, incredibly liberating experience. Elvis looked at each of their faces. Joel, loyal and steadfast. Jerry, always quick with a laugh. Red and Sonny, his protectors, now looking like overgrown children. Marty still grumbling about his shirt, but unable to hide his grin. Charlie, ever cheerful. Larry, surprisingly wild in his play. He saw genuine affection and mirth in their eyes, not the professional deference he usually encountered. This wasn't just a water fight. It was a release. For them, it was a break from the constant demands of their jobs, a chance to see their boss as just a regular guy. For Elvis, it was a profound moment of connection, a reminder that the people around him weren't just parts of his machine, but genuine friends who were willing to play, to laugh, to get absolutely soaked right alongside him. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling far more comforting than the dry clothes he would soon put on. It wasn't about the water or the guns or even the surprise. It was about the shared experience, the collective letting go. "All right, boys," Elvis said, slowly pushing himself up. "I think the first round goes to everyone. We all got thoroughly soaked, but I think we earned it." A few groans followed, some stretching, and then a slow exodus towards the bathrooms for much-needed towel-offs and changes of clothes. But the air was lighter, the smiles were wider, and the unspoken bond between them was stronger than ever. The weight Elvis had been carrying seemed to have been rinsed away, at least for a little while, by a deluge of pure, unadulterated fun. Just when everyone thought the water war was over, a mischievous glint returned to Elvis's eyes. Most of the guys were scattered, drying off, changing into fresh clothes, or raiding the kitchen for celebratory snacks. The immediate living room was still damp, but the main battle seemed to have concluded. Elvis, however, had a final plan. He'd noticed the expansive private balcony connected to the penthouse, an area rarely used for anything but quiet contemplation or a quick smoke. It was perfect, and he had saved his biggest secret weapon. He quietly slipped into his private bathroom, which was connected to a smaller, more secluded section of the balcony. He opened a rarely used cabinet and pulled out not one but two brand new, even larger, super soakers. He had kept hidden, knowing he'd want a grand finale. These were the kind that held gallons of water and could launch a stream 50 feet. He filled them both, the sheer weight of them making his muscles strain. He chuckled, imagining the impact. Meanwhile, a few of the guys like Red and Sunny were starting to gather back in the main living area, still damp but in clean clothes. Marty Lacker was complaining good-naturedly about his ruined shirt. Charlie Hodge was strumming a guitar again, a happy tune this time. Suddenly, a loud, piercing whistle cut through the air. Everyone froze, looking towards the source. Elvis stood silhouetted against the bright Vegas lights on the balcony, a giant water pistol in each hand, like a triumphant general. "Gentlemen," Elvis boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "You thought it was over, did you? Foolish mortals. This is Las Vegas. The show must go on." Before anyone could react, he unleashed a dual torrent of water blasting Red and Sunny, who were standing closest to the balcony doors. The sheer volume of water hit them like a tidal wave, drenching them more thoroughly than any previous shot. They gasped, stumbled back, completely stunned. "Oh, you're on, King," Red roared, shaking his head, water flying everywhere. He lunged towards the balcony doors, ready to retaliate, even though he had no weapon. Elvis, laughing maniacally, quickly ducked back inside the balcony, disappearing from view. He had a strategy. He knew they'd try to come after him. The other guys, seeing Red and Sunny get obliterated, let out shouts of surprise and renewed excitement. "He's still got more," someone yelled. "Get him." The chase was on. Red, Sunny, Joe, Jerry, Marty, Charlie, almost the entire entourage converged on the balcony doors, determined to get Elvis. Elvis, meanwhile, had positioned himself strategically. He stood behind a large stone planter, reloaded and waited. As Red and Sunny burst onto the balcony, he popped up, firing both super soakers in a sweeping motion, catching them both again. "You're a dead man," Sunny shrieked, laughing despite himself. The balcony became the final arena. There were no more hidden guns in wit. The guys tried to flank Elvis, some running along the railings, others trying to rush him directly. But Elvis was too quick, too agile, fueled by a renewed burst of energy. He used the planter as cover, peeking out, firing, then ducking back. He knew the layout of the balcony intimately. He spun around, catching Marty Lacker trying to sneak up on his left. Marty yelped as a powerful jet of water hit him. Joe Esposito, always thinking, tried to use a large outdoor table as a shield, slowly advancing. Elvis saw him aimed and delivered a direct hit, soaking Joe's new dry shirt. Joe just laughed, throwing his hands up in mock surrender. The sun had set completely now, and the vibrant lights of Vegas twinkled around them, making the watery spectacle even more surreal. The cool night air felt refreshing against their wet skin. Finally, with only a few gallons left in his tanks, Elvis faced down Red and Sunny, who were now working together slowly. "Cool, all right, boys," Elvis said, a dramatic flair in his voice. "One last stand, come and get it." He emptied both super soakers in one magnificent sustained blast, creating a wall of water that soaked Red and Sunny from head to toe. They stood there dripping, defeated but smiling. Elvis, out of ammunition, threw his hands up in triumph. "King of the water war," he declared, his voice hoarse from laughing. Red and Sunny, soaked but thoroughly entertained, rushed him. Not with anger, but with playful embraces. They grabbed him, lifting him off his feet, and began to playfully shake him as if trying to bring the last drops of water out of him. Elvis shrieked with laughter, completely defenseless but utterly joyful. The other guys joined in, patting him on the back, ruffling his wet hair, all of them laughing, their exhaustion replaced by a shared sense of victory and camaraderie. The grand finale had been a complete success. The suite and now the balcony were drenched, but the hearts of everyone present were full. The last drops of water had been squeezed, the last giggles had died down, replaced by contented sighs. The balcony was a wet wonderland, and the suite looked like a hurricane had passed through, leaving damp footprints and soaked patches everywhere. But the atmosphere was one of profound peace and satisfaction. The initial cleanup was a collective, unspoken effort. Towels were distributed, wet clothes were peeled off and tossed into piles. The hotel staff, no doubt accustomed to Elvis's eccentricities, would handle the major drying and cleaning later. For now, it was about getting everyone dry and comfortable. Elvis, wrapped in a large fluffy towel, sat on a dry armchair, watching his entourage. They were still buzzing, recounting their favorite moments from the water fight. "Did you see Red's face when Elvis hit him with that first blast?" Marty Lacker chuckled, pulling on a fresh t-shirt. He looked like a confused walrus. Red West, now dry and much warmer, playfully swatted at Marty. "Hey, I was just getting warmed up." And then he went full Rambo on the balcony. Laughter filled the room again. It was different from the frantic, excited laughter of the fight. This was a warm, relaxed, post-joy laughter. Elvis just smiled, soaking it all in. He felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. His body was tired, but in a good way, the satisfying exhaustion that comes from physical exertion and genuine fun, not from the draining demands of performance. He watched Joe Esposito, who was now helping Charlie Hodge wring out his guitar strap. Mercifully, the guitar itself had been spared from any major damage. Joe caught Elvis's eye and gave him a knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement of a mission accomplished. Jerry Schilling was talking animatedly with Sonny, recounting a particularly daring flank maneuver. Larry Geller was actually laughing, something Elvis hadn't seen from him in a while. Even the quieter members of the entourage were smiling, their faces relaxed and happy. Elvis thought about the past few months, the mounting pressure, the nagging feeling of isolation despite being surrounded by people. He'd felt like a product, a commodity, always on display, always expected to be the king. Private Elvis, the goofy, fun-loving guy from Tupelo, felt like he was slowly being squeezed out. But tonight, that guy had broken free. He hadn't worried about his image, about being dignified, about what Colonel Parker would say. He had simply acted on an impulse, a childish whim, and it had paid off in spades. He hadn't just soaked his friends. He had reconnected with them. He had seen them as more than just staff. He had seen them as companions, as brothers. And they had seen him as more than just Elvis Presley, the legend. They had seen him as their friend, their leader, who was willing to get just as soaked and silly as they were. "Hey," Joe said, walking over to him, a fresh mug of coffee in his hand. "You feeling better now?" Elvis took the coffee, feeling the warmth against his hands. He looked Joe directly in the eye, a sincere gratitude shining in his own. "Joe, I haven't felt this good in I don't know how long." He took a deep breath. "That was exactly what I needed. Thank you for everything." Joe just smiled, understanding the unspoken depth of that gratitude. "Anytime. You just say the word, though next time maybe we could try something a little less damp." He chuckled, and Elvis joined him. Elvis looked around the room again. The scattered towels, the damp patches, the discarded empty water pistols. It was a scene of beautiful chaos. It wasn't the kind of peace he usually sought in his quiet moments, but it was a much deeper, more fulfilling peace. It was the peace that comes from shedding the weight of expectation, from embracing pure joy, and from sharing it with the people who mattered most. He hadn't needed a grand gesture or a major vacation. He just needed a reminder of who he was, beneath the glittering jumpsuits and roaring crowds, and a whole lot of water pistols. The overwhelming feeling in the room wasn't just physical warmth from being dry. It was a deep, soul-level warmth that radiated from genuine connection and shared happiness. The next morning, the suite was remarkably clean, thanks to the hotel staff who had worked through the night. The dampness was gone, the furniture had been dried, and a faint scent of lemon polish hung in the air. But the memory of the water fight lingered, a silent, happy current running beneath the usual morning routine. Elvis was still feeling the afterglow. He was humming as he ate breakfast, occasionally catching the eye of one of the guys and sharing a knowing smile. The bond from the previous night felt stronger, more real. Then the phone rang. Joe Esposito answered it, and his expression immediately tightened. He handed the phone to Elvis. "It's the Colonel E., Colonel Tom Parker, the man who managed every aspect of Elvis's life, from his record deals to his tour schedules, from his movie contracts to his public appearances. The Colonel was all business all the time. He hated anything that wasn't directly related to making money or maintaining Elvis's image. A water pistol fight would definitely not be on his approved list of activities." Elvis took the phone, a slight sigh escaping him. This was the reality of his life. The fun, spontaneous moments were rare, always susceptible to being overshadowed by the relentless demands of his career. "Colonel," Elvis said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Elvis?" Colonel's booming voice, even through the phone, had a way of cutting through any lingering good mood. "I just got a call from the hotel manager. Something about an incident in the penthouse last night. Something about water damage, an unusual activity." Elvis could feel a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He imagined the hotel manager trying to explain to the straight-laced Colonel that his biggest star had turned his luxury suite into an aquatic battlefield. "Oh, that," Elvis said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just a little harmless fun, Colonel. The boys were getting a bit stir-crazy, so we blew off some steam." "Blew off some steam." The Colonel's voice rose an octave. "Elvis, this is a five-star hotel. What exactly happened? Was there a leak? Were you throwing water on people?" Elvis decided to just tell the truth in his own charming way. He felt too good to lie or be defensive. "Well, Colonel, we had a little water pistol fight. Needed to cool off, you know. Vegas gets hot, and everyone was feeling a bit cooped up. It was a good time." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Elvis could almost hear the gears turning in the Colonel's head, trying to process this completely unbusinesslike information. "A water pistol fight." The Colonel finally repeated, his voice slow and disbelieving. "Elvis, are you feeling well? Are you under a lot of stress? Perhaps we should reconsider the next show. Give you a rest day?" Elvis chuckled. This was the Colonel's fallback. If Elvis wasn't being productive, he must be sick or stressed. The idea that Elvis just wanted to have fun like a normal person was alien to him. "No, Colonel, I'm feeling great," Elvis said, a genuine smile in his voice. "Now, best I've felt in a long time? Actually, it was just what the doctor ordered. Cleared my head. I'm ready for tonight's show. Fired up and ready to go." He heard the Colonel sigh, a sound of exasperated resignation. "Well, as long as it doesn't happen again and the hotel manager assures me the damage is minimal. But Elvis, you are professional. Your image—" "My image is just fine, Colonel," Elvis interjected, his voice firm but still good-natured. "Sometimes a little fun is good for the image. Shows I'm human, shows I'm happy." Another pause. The Colonel, ever the strategist, was probably weighing the public relations angle. A human Elvis, maybe not so bad, but the mess. "Just no more water pistols, Elvis," the Colonel finally conceded, his voice still gruff. "And please try to keep the steam blowing off in a more conventional manner." "Will do," Colonel Elvis said, winking at Joe, who was stifling a laugh. "See you tonight." He hung up the phone, a triumphant grin on his face. He hadn't been defensive or apologetic. He had simply stated the truth, and for once he hadn't let the Colonel's rigid rules dampen his spirits. He felt a newfound sense of self-assurance, a quiet strength that came from having reconnected with his own joy. He looked at the guys, all of whom had been listening intently. "Colonel's not thrilled," he announced, "but he survived, and he knows I'm ready for the show." A cheer went up from the entourage. They understood. This wasn't just about a water fight. It was about Elvis claiming a little piece of his life back, a small victory against the overwhelming machinery of his fame. And they were all part of that victory. The warmth in the room was palpable, a testament to the fact that genuine connection and childlike joy could stand up to even the sternest of calls from Colonel Tom Parker. The atmosphere in the suite, and indeed throughout Elvis's entire entourage, remained noticeably lighter in the days following the Great Water Pistol War. There was an ease, a shared secret between them that felt like a special bond. Laughter came more easily, jokes were sharper, and the underlying tension that often accompanied life with the king seemed to have dissipated. Replaced by a current of warmth, Elvis himself was transformed, his perforced zest. He moved with more freedom on stage, his voice resonated with renewed passion. He wasn't just performing the songs, he was living them, sharing the joy he had rediscovered. The audiences, though they didn't know why, felt it too, responding with even wilder enthusiasm. Back in the suite, there were new inside jokes. Someone would jokingly say, "Watch out for a rogue wave," if someone spilled a drink. Or Marty Lacker would dramatically pat his chest and groan, "Oh, my good shirt," at the slightest hint of dampness. Camaraderie was palpable, a tangible thing that bound them together more tightly than ever. Elvis found himself seeking out moments with the guys, not just for business, but for genuine conversation, for shared laughter. He listened more, engaged more. He saw them not just as his support system, but as his extended family, the people who truly understood the unique pressures and isolation of his life, and who had been willing to dive headfirst into a ridiculous water fight just to see him smile. One evening, after another electrifying show, Elvis walked into his bedroom feeling that pleasant exhaustion that comes from giving his all. He looked around his opulent room, no longer feeling trapped, but instead surrounded by a comfortable sense of belonging. He went to the utility closet, the one that had held the arsenal of water pistols. It was mostly empty now, the boxes discarded, the guns having either been left with the hotel staff to be dried and cleaned, or somehow disappearing as souvenirs among the crew. But Elvis had kept one. He reached behind a stack of clean towels and pulled out a small, neon green water pistol, one of the first ones he picked up from the toy store. It was simple, unassuming, almost childlike. He held it in his hand, feeling the smooth plastic, remembering the weight of it when it was full. He smiled. This little plastic toy, this innocent object, had been the catalyst for something truly profound. It was a symbol of letting go, of embracing joy, of finding connection in the most unexpected ways. It was a reminder that even the king needed to play, needed to be silly, needed to just be Elvis. Sometimes he decided to keep it, not for another fight, not yet. Anyway, just as a reminder, a small secret weapon against the pressures of fame, a little piece of light he could hold on to. He placed it on his bedside table right next to his Bible, and a framed photo of his mother. It looked completely out of place, yet perfectly at home, as he drifted off to sleep. Elvis thought about the future. The shows, the movies, the endless demands, they would all still be there. The colonel would still call, but something had shifted inside him. He had found a way to recharge, to reconnect, to find authentic joy amidst the chaos. He had learned that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought on stage or in boardrooms, but in hotel suites, with water pistols surrounded by friends who truly cared. And that, he realized, was the most heartwarming victory of all. He knew with a quiet certainty that this wouldn't be the last time the king of rock and roll would declare a water war. This was just the beginning of a beautiful, slightly damp new chapter